Most of Australia is pretty dry, but in the Blue Mountains we have quite a lot of running water. Creeks, cascades, waterfalls. In fact, it's a catchment area for Sydney. And sometimes that water really tears along. And as an author, that's exactly what you want your narrative to do. If your reader sticks a toe into your story, you want them to get swept along like a leaf in a stream. Your first job, obviously, is to build a path your reader will want to move along, and that's the plot. And it has to be alluring and interesting. And then you need a confident voice for your reader to want to follow. But most of all, you have to pull your reader along with you at an escalating pace. How do you do that? Well, one way is to arrange your plot so that it slowly builds tension. A good example of that in the real world is when you're waiting for something to start. Like, for example, when you go to the Christmas at Leura event and you're waiting for the Pooch Parade to kick off. You can sense the build-up. First, there are just a few people hanging around. Then more start to gather. Then Santa's fire truck arrives, building the tension by driving up the street and circling back again. And all the while, the parade participants, twitching with nerves, are slowly congregating. As is the audience. Until finally, the parade begins. There's another way of quickening the pace. In film, when you have a pan like this, it slows the pace down, which is also what happens when you write long, meandering sentences. The same thing goes when it comes to speeding things up. In video, if you have a series of really quick cuts, it adds speed and tension. And you can do the same thing on the page by shortening your sentences. Speaking of catching trains, the Blue Mountains railway line is a good metaphor for a well-structured narrative because it runs across the mountains like a spine. It was actually built during the 1860s, and some of the stations are quite flash with lending libraries and old fireplaces and even, in Falconbridge, a Persian rug. One thing you'll notice if you spend a large amount of time in the mountains area is the string of level crossing keepers' cottages that were built across the mountains in the 1860s and 70s. There are only half a dozen of them left now, but they're so solid and impressive that they give you some idea of how central the railway line was to the mountains, just as a good structure or plot line holds up a story. Leaving Leura station is kind of like opening a book. You spend a little bit of time moving through the countryside, and then you reach your first stop, which in a book might be your first big scene, an inciting incident perhaps. In this case, the next station is Katoomba, which is a pretty big one. Then you head off again, out of Katoomba and into the wilds, where, in a book, the adventure would begin. You do have a few stops along the way. Blackheath, for instance, is a major one. But you might find that your next really important scene is Mount Victoria Station, which could be a major turning point in your book. Mount Victoria Station was opened in 1868 and it's heritage listed with a museum included as part of the collection of old buildings. A lot of Blue Mountains trains actually terminate here. Maybe, if the railway line was a novel, this is where some important character would die. Heading out of Mount Victoria Station is when the views get really spectacular and the sense of isolation more intense, which is exactly what happens in a book when you're building up to the climax. You also get a sense of past drama when you see the scars of the 2019-2020 Black Summer bushfires. Many of the trees have not grown back. Then you reach the part of the narrative that, in a film, might be the dark night of the soul section, just before the last act. the tunnels. There are multiple tunnels punched through the cliffs at this point, and it's pretty dramatic. And finally, on the other side of the tunnels, you emerge into the old railway yards at Zigzag, which are part of the remarkable 19th century Zigzag Railway. It's pretty dramatic terrain around here. I would say the climax of the narrative. And then, at last, you reach the calm expanse of the Lithgow Valley, which is the end of the book. And with any luck, it's been one hell of a ride.